move to the motion before the House tonight, which is this House rejects traditional masculinity. I now look to Varuna Mitra, the Women's Officer, to open the case for the proposition.
Good evening, and may I begin by thanking the President for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight on such an important topic. When Genevieve first asked me to run on her slate in Michaelmas, she told me of her original intention to have an all-female slate in terms of officers. I would just like to congratulate her for achieving this, because both her treasurer and her secretary are far bigger girls than I am. Now, that's a very problematic thing for me to say, because tonight we're rejecting traditional masculinity. We're rejecting traditional masculinity because it's toxic, and it's toxic because it's powerful. Tradition is rarely strayed from and remains unchallenged. Tradition is an unspoken rule that people are happy to observe. Tradition is power. The point of an evolving society is that no construct can stay traditional forever. Some traditions you can nudge along, others need to be dragged into the 21st century. So tonight, let me show you that traditional masculinity is harmful to men, that it is the cause and the result of a power imbalance, which it continues to propagate, and that the power playing field is being leveled out due to changing gender roles, and controlling traditional masculinity unleashes tremendous benefits for society. But before I begin, it falls upon me to introduce the opposition speakers tonight. Speaking first is Miriam Feldman, a first-year PPEist, currently Director of Operations at the Oxford Union. Miriam is a passionate advocate for increased female engagement in crypto, and in fact has an Instagram account dedicated to this endeavor, the Bitchcoin. Next is Martin Daubney, a self-professed wanker. Apparently, this is how he introduces himself in schools when giving talks on porn, though some would say that this is just because he intends to run for the Brexit Party in the upcoming European elections.
That's also true. Shall I just go now?
Martin is a journalist and was the longest-serving editor of Lad magazine, Loaded, and was formerly known as King of the Lads. Closing the case for the opposition is Judd Horace, current president and CEO of the North American Interfraternity Conference. When informed that a frat hazing ritual, which he was adamant no longer existed, did in fact still exist, he said, "I'm, expletive, mad that this stuff is still going on. Am I just fighting for a bunch of idiots?" Hopefully he'll be asking himself the same question after hearing my arguments tonight. Madam President, these are your speakers, and they are most welcome. Men are 3.5 times more likely to commit suicide than women, and it is the leading cause of death for men under 35. Men are occupying the top jobs and making the most money, but they also form over 90% of the prison population. They suffer more academic challenges. The most underperforming demographic group in the UK is the white working-class male. Men are simultaneously the top of society and the bottom of the pile. This proves that something is wrong. And the common denominator is traditional masculinity. When and where does masculinity begin? We become gendered beings from the moment we are born. The comedian Hannah Gadsby said that there was too much hysteria around gender from the gender normals. A man in a skirt isn't weird. Pink headbands on bald babies is weird. And she has a point. Why does it matter if people assume that your bald baby is a boy or a girl? At that age, what is the difference really? Masculinity begins early with the philosophy of boys will be boys. This omnipotent maxim is too often resorted to as a justification for boisterous, mischievous, and overly competitive behavior. From a young age, this stereotype threat, where people internalize negative stereotypes, impacts their academic performance. It impairs our sense of competence, our feelings of belonging, of control, and this can dramatically influence our intellectual capacities. Boys will be boys becomes an ingrained mantra for boys to live by and girls to accept and let slide. It restricts the expression of children. Be yourself does not apply to the boys who have to be boys. It is no surprise that many men struggle to reconcile their own precarious masculinities with this harsh cultural expectation of manhood. Manhood generally has to be earned and maintained through actions in a way which womanhood doesn't. Not following these norms is social suicide, but a determination to follow them has been a real cause of actual loss of life. A loss of life that could be avoided if we abandon the concept of traditional masculinity once and for all. Some argue that this crisis of male identity and the fact that boys are lagging behind academically is to do with a lack of male role models, particularly in the education system, as the majority of teachers are female. But this is wrong. The problem is not being able or willing to recognize positive and imitable traits when not expressed by another man. Why can't women also be role models for men? Men have had to be our role models forever. Thatcher had Churchill, Pelosi had Kennedy, Taylor Swift had Tim McGraw. Rejecting traditional masculinity is necessary, as it liberates men who don't comply with its norms, which I hate to break it to you lads, is all of you here tonight. Masculinity is not something anyone is born with, but is something that is nurtured. Most men will never voluntarily want to be everything that standard requires, and most men will never be able to be everything that standard requires. And this is where the struggle begins. There is nothing wrong with wanting to be tough and wanting to lead, but there is something wrong with considering these traits necessarily and exclusively masculine. Despite many men aiming for masculinity with the best of intentions, traditional masculinity is in fact toxic, and the root of the toxicity lies in only one trait: power, or more accurately, an imbalance of it. And this leads me on to my second point, that traditional masculinity is a result of a power imbalance. Traditional masculinity is incredibly difficult to define. Even the American Psychological Association has been known to give conflicting definitions. However, traditional masculinity can be explained in relation to power. If there is no net power gained by the enactment of traditionally masculine traits, then the toxicity of it no longer exists. The quest for masculinity is a subconscious one, to prove a rightful place at the top of the food chain, to be the alpha male. Even the most dominant is emasculated in comparison to the alpha. This is not a position any man wants to find himself in, and hence he strives to use masculinity to put himself in the most powerful position. The supremacy of masculinity needed a counterbalance, and so its equal and opposite reaction, femininity, was born. Traditional masculinity and traditional femininity are not individually existing opposites which attract each other. The former has incited the need for the latter. As film director Denis Villeneuve said, masculinity is about control, and femininity is more of an embrace, the art of listening. For all the stoicism, dominance, aggression, and competitiveness traditionally displayed by men, women have had to be emotional, docile, sweet-tempered, and shyer of their abilities. If women do not display these traits, they're lesbian, or it's their time of month, or they need to get laid. This power dynamic has created the notion of chivalry. Acts of holding doors, leading women by putting hands behind their backs, paying for food, these are all embedded acts of benevolence. This benevolence is well-intentioned, but is nonetheless a pretense. Women have always been taught to feel grateful and to expect this treatment, but the only reason it's a given is because these are all subtle, insidious assertions of power, showing who's in charge. Some women, and I don't say feminists because I'm taking it for granted that everyone here, male or female, is one, or will be by the end of this. Some women are accused of man-hating. Women don't hate men. They might hate some men, just as anyone might hate the next person. But women don't hate men. Women hate what men have the power to do to them. Women are scared of men. If this power imbalance did not exist, if men were always conscious that they would have to answer to something bigger than themselves, that boys will be boys wouldn't save them, then masculinity would just be one end of a filled-out spectrum, no longer binary. A spectrum where no one place was more dominant than the other. Men would go from being hunters to being farmers, from working in competition and isolation to working with everyone else to build something more constructive and something less fragile than masculinity, humanity. This shift is already happening, and this brings me on to my third and final point, that the power playing field is being leveled out due to changing gender roles, and controlling traditional masculinity unleashes tremendous benefits for society. What are some of the traits which repeatedly come up when people think of masculinity? Martin Daubney has said that providing for their families is one of the wholesome things men say make them feel fulfilled. Yet, if this is what it takes, what happens when men are not the principal breadwinners, or even worse, unemployed? Admittedly, providing for their families doesn't necessarily mean being the main provider, but we all know that this is more or less what it entails. Traditionally, men have had their role as man of the house, and women have had their role as domestic goddess, and had no power to break the mold. But not anymore. Women now have jobs, and in some cases, earn more than their male counterpart, God forbid. Women no longer need men to be the providers. If men continue to want to be, that's wonderful, as long as it's coming from a place of love and not from a need to affirm their strength and dominance. Men often also have a desire to protect. Traditionally, this is because they have always been the stronger sex. And they also know their own kind. They know what they were like when they were younger. So when they have transitioned from this young, laddish behavior to proper manhood, they feel duty-bound to protect women from people like their former selves. However, some countries have taken steps to ensure that women feel protected regardless. Spain is the only country in the EU where certain acts done by men are a crime, whereas the same acts done by women are not. The burden of proof is placed on the man, requiring him to prove his innocence. Men have been taken to court over crosswords, refusing to let their partners watch certain TV channels, and criticizing what their partners wear. Admittedly, this is a step too far, because it has reversed the power dynamic rather than neutralizing it altogether. But by giving all the cards to women, it shows that some sort of progress is being made. Now we just need to find a happy medium. Controlling traditional masculinity and traditionally masculine environments is greatly beneficial for society as a whole. Most major companies now have various diversity initiatives, and campaigns such as the 30% Club have shown that diversity results in better all-round board performance and ultimately increases corporate performance overall. Baroness Hale has stressed that the judiciary needs to be more diverse so that people feel those on the bench are genuinely our judges, rather than beings from another planet, as 3/4 of the Supreme Court is currently male and white, and stated the importance of bringing in other experience. If we remove the masculine monopoly from these influential environments, our world really will be a better place. For all these reasons, I urge you to support the motion by walking out of the door marked I this evening. Alternatively, if you believe that lads, lads, lads is life, 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 then walk out the door marked no's. And don't say ladies first. Thank you.